All right, how's everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we took a look at some great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, grand unified theories, cosmologies, things that you can apply in your own life in all situations. If only you knew about it. But it's probably pretty obscure, so that's why I'm doing the video, because that's kind of what I do, is try to prevent important things from being lost to history. And that is pretty much what this reading is about. This is episode 10 of the reading called It's After the End of the World. Don't You Know That Yet? Which is a story, a history of two groups of pretty obscure African-American musicians, jazz musicians so-called, in Chicago, about the middle part of the 20th century, mid to late 20th century. And we are in chapter 2 called Orchestration, which is about Sun Ra's procedure in putting together his band and his thinking behind his band and his presentation to the people. And we're going to take over in a section that is called Dark Space and the Space Race. Okay, this is kind of explaining Sun Ra's position on this, and so we'll start right here. Blacks have to first understand themselves, which is impossible if they are following someone else's mythology. By going back to ancient history, the Bible, and forward to space, Sun Ra tried to create an inverted story of slavery that was a sustainable mythology for black people and Americans in general. Indeed, Ra's space race myth was tuned by an inversion to present a different story of slavery, to create harmony out of suffering. He tried to reconcile a spiritual feeling of hope with the centuries-long blot on America that the history of slavery represented. Instead of a total condemnation of the West and a total embrace of Africa, Ra's mythology of slavery went something like this. In ancient Egypt, even before the days of Adam and Eve, the Egyptians had a thriving society which lasted for over 5,000 years. Quote, lasted for over 5,000 years. That's a quote from Sun Ra. This society worked because it was based on nonverbal symbolism. The hieroglyphs, the sound symbolism, and the temple's geometric symbolism taught people how to be. In the second millennium BCE, however, Moses, quote, took down all the statues and the people were lost, except for those who had already been initiated into the esoteric wisdom that was held within the priesthood. While the pharaohs gradually became more interested in maintaining a material empire, the priesthood spent century after century developing in spiritual matters and technologies. The pyramids and the Sphinx, in fact, were not shrines to the deceased pharaoh gods, but were instead complex initiation and ascension temples to help the priests and initiated become like gods, to ascend beyond the human state. Once ascended, the initiates were free of the fetters of death, able to control their own reincarnation. The pyramid succeeded in ascending thousands of humans to their higher station, that of angels or humanitarians, who committed themselves to a mission of helping Earth evolve. Basically, the ascended masters tried to create a, quote, angel race on Earth to counteract the confounders. Later, after Egyptian dominance faded, many of these ascended masters were taken by force by other black Africans and sold into slavery and transported first to Ethiopia, then to West Africa. As angels could not be stopped by mundane punishments like slavery and death, they accepted their lot as ostensible slaves, but really as, quote, humanitarians to the world. For hundreds of years, the masters, as slaves, were secretly initiating as many mortals as time permitted. The slaves' apparent suffering was for Sun Ra part of a long-term plan of sacrifice. By the time the Spanish, Portuguese, and English ships arrived on West African shores, angels were widespread, though not a critical mass of the population. The European slave trade was an opportunity for black angels to insert themselves into Western society. Slavery made it possible for America to, quote, take a whole people and bring them into the country in the Commerce Department. It was possible for aliens and angels and devils and demons to come into this country. They didn't need no passports. The people chosen, that's the end of the quote. The people chosen for slavery by the European slavers were disproportionately represented by the black angels. He cited scripture, quote, the Bible does say angels reserved in chains of darkness. That's talking about black folks in America. Sun Ra relied upon mythological technicalities or wordology to explain slavery. Quote, he sent in this country as humanitarians, and they were not slaves. A humanitarian does things for the world, but they don't get paid for it. While the Creator sent them as gods, Europeans, having no knowledge of the Creator, mistranslated gods, G-O-D-S, as goods, G-O-O-D-S. End quote. Worse, this is a situation that has yet to be rectified, he argued. Quote, and the white race say you free. The white race can't just sign that, the Emancipation Proclamation. So black people got to go and sign that, yes, I'm free, he said. Moreover, quote, unless you go all the way back to the past and give everyone who came into this country as a slave passports, then black people will have no legal status in this country. Today, many of the angels have lost their way. In other words, many angels have descended back into human consciousness because they lost track of their spiritual heritage while in America. Since then, he complained, quote, you got a problem with black children everywhere. They can't learn by Western standards. They can't do it that way. You got to do it with symbols and signs like they were taught that way. The way it's done now is artificial. End quote. Egyptologist R.A. Schwaller de Lubitz, in agreement, declared that it was the change away from an anthropocentric worldview that stunted the spiritual growth of traditional peoples. The idea that humans were not at the center of the universe made them alienate themselves from the world through external rather than intuitive science and technology. Further, in its fight to advance scientifically, the West gave its citizens too many secular responsibilities to have time to pursue intense spiritual disciplines. More important, with the widespread missionary work of the Protestants, only a few of the angels were able to feel, to remember their spiritual heritage enough to pass it down amongst the African American slave population. They could be reincarnated, but without the teachings and the culture, the reincarnation would lose their legacy in childhood. Sun Ra felt it was now time to wake up the sleeping Egyptian angels so they could awaken others. Only through this awakening could the American blacks fulfill their mission to the Creator. Quote, He went out there and he selected some people from one of the nations, namely the ones called Negroes, and he took them and he took their country, and he turned them over into the hands of the nations and made them servants of everybody, and all to show the world that he can protect you if you ain't got no army and no navy and no soldiers and no money and no nothing. Now, he said, quote, "It is time for American blacks to shock the world, tell the world we've never been slaves, and that way the world will be ashamed for doing that." End quote. Ra discovered from his travels that only by waking up can the earth reverse an old prophecy. Quote, "The priest in ancient Egypt said, yeah, it will come a time when ancient Egyptians won't even know who they are. They be in a strange land. They be in the North Country. They got to find the name of the Creator they supposed to be worshiping." Now, by embracing Sun Ra's myth, blacks and dark whites can believe that the way out of Armageddon is through waking up to acknowledge the creative deity, to be reminded that they are angels and that they don't have to bow down to death. After generations of attrition, this angel quality has become dormant, but Ra believed that there were large numbers of angels amongst the American population, black and white, who are waiting to be awakened, to be reminded that they are angels. While most people remained asleep, Sun Ra cautioned that there were many realized angels, quote, "the ladies and gentlemen of the black race in America, simply waiting to be heard under the din of the more materialistic, physical, aggressive black man." Sun Ra admitted that he was not the first to have this idea. He paraphrased Albert Schweitzer, archetypal humanitarian. Quote, he told them that there will be, so this is a quote from Sun Ra paraphrasing Albert Schweitzer. He told them that there will come a time when the white race is going to be in trouble. They're going to need somebody else. They're going to need somebody in the black race to set things straight. But the difficulty, he said, was that since the white people were teaching the black people, they're not going to have a solution to their problems. Then the world is lost. And that's the reason he left Germany and went to Africa, to try and develop the black race to think differently than white people. He said he was doing it for the sake of the white race that had to have some black people who could not think like the white race. Sun Ra was adamant about this distinction because he believed American blacks had to find karmic guilt in themselves for valuing the material over the spiritual before blaming whites. Quote, "The Bible said they can't be helped until they condemned. Ain't no black come up and told a black man how wrong he is. Say, you know, you're doing wrong." Through a self-deprecating praxis, Sun Ra advocated the doctrine of black neutrality, contrasting with the righteous indignation of race leaders and black civil rights leaders. He preached black neutrality, quote, "That means they can walk right on through all of this. They are sensitive enough to see it didn't work. They're ready now to try something else. They tried everything, black power and black this and black that. I want to try black neutrality. That means they can walk right on through all of this. They really will be following a path of peace because true peace is neutrality." With black neutrality, Ra preached separating from but not opposing whites, to let whites continue with their ways, but to conscientiously object and create a new way. Much of Sun Ra's inverted code of ethics came out of his interpretation of slavery. When America put together its laws, they were put together for the, quote, good people. Blacks, however, were not included. They were bad people. Therefore, black people need not be interested in doing good or in being righteous. He believed, quote, "I'm an angel, but I'm a bad angel. A bad angel is superior to a good angel. End quote. Ever since the Creator made the humanitarian mission for blacks, righteous behavior was forbidden, as Sun Ra paraphrases the Creator. Quote, okay, now, you just go over there in the disobedient kingdom, and I'm going to fix it so where if I catch you doing something right, I'm going to punish you. They have to do something wrong. Now, the white race is different. They can do something either way, because they are Gentiles, and the Bible says that Gentiles are a law unto themselves. As a result, all these years, I've been sitting by watching the Reverend King and this and that other, and I knew they were going to fail, you know. I didn't get into none of that. Rather than Martin Luther King, African Americans need, quote, some black ignorant men to get up there and tell the truth on white people. But they got the educated ones up there and the preachers. They can't do nothing. But the ignorant black man is going to tell it just like it is. Once again, Sun Ra's inversion proceeded from ignorance rather than knowledge. The physical, ambitious black people had matters confused and stalled Sun Ra's program, which, like the Nation of Islam's, included summoning a mothership. He told his musicians, quote, your job is to raise the consciousness of the people on this planet through music so they can land. The space people depending on me to wake up the consciousness of people on this planet. They want me to take the music and awaken them to a sense of something else, and then they can land. Again, though, like the example of the space race, without awakening people before they were exposed to space disciplines, people of Earth jeopardized their safety. To those, he warned, quote, now people have to realize that they made out of meat, and some people might consider a human being as a delicacy, and they have to know when they go out in space where not to go. It must be emphasized that when Sun Ra talked of space, he meant inner space, creativity, transmolecularization. As Schwaller de Lubitz has pointed out, the ancient Egyptians rejected the heliocentric universe, fought for so hard by our heroes of Western scientific revolution, Copernicus, Galileo, and Bruno. Schwaller instead contended that thousands of years earlier, the Egyptian priests were fully aware that the earth rotated around the sun, but still allowed anthropocentrism. The problem with Western logic was that even if the earth rotated around the sun, it does not follow that the earth is not at the center of the universe. The paradox of a 4 or more dimensional universe is that it has an infinite amount of center points, or rather, the center is here and now. Without an anthropocentric universe, according to Schwaller, the West externalized their center. All of their science and technology became based on the external, rather than the internal world. Sun Ra believed that in order to embrace space and to maintain one's center, it was necessary to place the universe inside the mind. The idea of inner space descending further and further into the depths of consciousness. As opposed to the Nation of Islam, Sun Ra's mothership will be landing inside our minds. Basically, as a result of the events described above, post-apocalyptic conditions have just gotten too weird for rational thinking. Quote, it's just like a sci-fi film now. You've outlived the Bible, which was your scenario. Whatever men and women were doing 10, 20, or 50 years ago has nothing to do with children today. Quote, end quote. In his analysis, both blacks and whites have misunderstood God and Satan. Ra contended that we need to stop worrying about God, Satan, no God, and death, and start paying attention to the Creator. To the Creator, quote, this world is not real. It's just a drama. It's a passion play. In order to, that's the end of the quote, in order to creatively move beyond this lower reality, it was necessary to look to space, to appeal to an intergalactic council, and to allege that, quote, this is not a good creation. An appeal to space shows that one can stand up to and face the Creator, challenging the Creator to change the creation. This appeal is dangerous, however, if one is not sincere and not under the influence of discipline. Only through discipline can one respectfully approach the Creator. Sun Ra's space music was a sustained attempt to appeal to the Creator and to awaken angels. This gradual process naturally had to start with disciplining musicians in person and could be spread from that center. His dark space myth allowed him to be more separatist and at the same time less threatening than other black leaders. Okay, that's the end of that section. This is the final section of the chapter. It's just called Conclusion. As a black man, or as an alien who looked like a black man, Sun Ra reflected the nationalist tendencies of the urban prophets. Like other underground black leaders, Sun Ra condemned the white world and also the imitative race African American world. For Ra, there was no need to celebrate one's blackness, only to utilize the creative spiritual power that was part of the black tradition. That power, however, needed to be activated by the fires of discipline, first for the musicians and eventually for the audience. Using all the resources at his disposal, his musicianship, his alien myth and knowledge of the Bible, the military, DuSable High, Alton Abraham and the Bronzeville Kabbalists, and a superhuman reserve of energy, Sun Ra was able to build and maintain the orchestra. By 1960, he had a handful of disciples and a few dozen other fence-sitting apprentices. By this time, he must have sensed some stability with the core members. He might have noticed the Chicago scene drying up. He also might have thought that the first part of his mission had been accomplished. Maybe he thought it was time to reach out to different musicians and different audiences. Perhaps the Creator told him so. Whatever the reason, he decided to leave Chicago. In 1960, Sun Ra and about 5 core disciples left the South Side for an extended stay in Montreal. Then they traveled to New York City, where their car broke down. Stranded, they decided to stay and eventually settled on the Lower East Side. Sun Ra started recruiting new musicians there, but with his exit, the story of Sun Ra's orchestra parts ways with Chicago. Ra's influence remained, though, because he left behind a group of like-minded, if not totally convinced, musicians who had to learn to make their way without his leadership. In Chicago, the creative formula remained the same. The new leadership adhered to an initial inversion, then a practice of discipline to get to creativity. The story of these remaining Chicago creative musicians follows in chapters 4 through 6. But first, we must briefly follow Sun Ra to New York and recount the happenings there during the 1960s in chapter 3, which I guess we will start up tomorrow. So that's the end of chapter 2, and I think we'll just leave it there and start out fresh with chapter 3 when we get going tomorrow. Let me just make sure I got it here. Yeah, so chapter 3 is called, oh, I'm sorry. I uploaded chapter 4. So let me see if I can find chapter 3. Hope I didn't. Okay, this does look like chapter 3. And it is called The Struggle for Freedom in New York. And let's see. Let's read the introduction. It's just one page, and we got a little bit of time here. So, Chapter 3, The Struggle for Freedom in New York. Let me get this situated here. When Sun Ra and his band arrived in New York in 1961, the established world of bebop jazz was undergoing a profound schism. To some, bebop, so hot and potent in the 1940s, was now cool under the restrictive demands of representation and repetition. Nightclub owners demanded that the musicians represent the club's interest in their music, whether that be danceable music, music to stimulate drinking, or music to accompany another act. Record companies demanded that music in repetition be readily packaged for consumption. Songs could not exceed a certain length, and they needed to follow certain formulaic rules. Concomitantly, some of the musicians had developed dependencies like heroin, which paralyzed their creativity. Addicted musicians still had the inspiration, but not the willingness to sacrifice in order to develop it, having more devotion to the substance. Moreover, just as some musicians had become addicted to drugs, some suffered from stylistic dependencies that stunted their evolution. By the late 1950s, a handful of musicians were drawing attention to this situation by pioneering a new, controversial way of playing that rejected the hip and cool worlds of bebop. Variously called free jazz, the new thing, the avant-garde, out jazz, or even noise, its musicians produced sounds that were liberating to some, but offensive to others. The jazz world has remained badly splintered ever since. Before it became a movement, there were a few isolated leaders who each broke a path and attracted followings. It can be said that Sun Ra was one of these leaders, but the orchestra was really a movement unto itself, especially when it swelled to over 24 members. Sun Ra's contributions to the New York movement will be dealt with in a later section, for he had a mostly underground, hidden effect on the movement. This chapter will highlight other leaders, Ornette Coleman, Cecil Taylor, Albert Ayler, and John Coltrane, because their struggles set the tone for what happened in Chicago at about the same time. Okay, we'll probably go over that introduction again tomorrow, and then we'll get that whole chapter 3 started. So thanks for tuning in today, and tune in tomorrow to continue the story. It's really a history, but have a great day.